Okay, so I'm going to kind of take a discussion that's going on right now and put it in a different direction. Um, I watched a little back and forth between Piro and Barklord over essentialism, um, mainly as it has to do with metaphysics. Barklord is defending a Platonic position, um, and but what the idea of essentialism reminded me of is I'm thinking of it as applies to ethical philosophy. It seems that one concept we have in our ethical framework, our political philosophy, in fact, is the concept of rights. Um, it's said that the Western world derives from two locations, Athens and Jerusalem. Namely that it comes from there's the Greco-Roman tradition on one hand and the uh, Hebrew biblical tradition on the other hand, and that Western culture today is a mix of the two. And I find it interesting. Rights, the idea of rights comes to us from the Greco-Roman tradition, but not even so much from the Greeks, more from the Romans. Because I mean, if you look at Aristotle, Aristotle's ethics were more concerned with virtue than with rights. Um, Whereas for actually saw an interesting article about the Jewish position on animal rights. It talked about how rights were not found in the Hebrew tradition, but rather responsibilities, and that the biblical prohibitions in Talmudic prohibitions against cruelty to animals were based not on the rights of the animal, but rather on the fact that being cruel to animals degrades you. It degrades your humanity in doing so. But anyway, but it kind of brings us back to the topic. I mean, do rights exist? What do we mean by rights? Or is it a useful concept? One thing that a lot of people have discussed is healthcare a right? Is that the right framework for understanding rights? I mean, libertarians will often protest vehemently that healthcare is not a right. You only have a right to be left alone, which is almost kind of a curious claim given our social nature. If you look at what a dictionary definition of rights, it basically means that which is owed to someone. And so say you owe me the right to leave me, saying I ought to be left alone because you owe me that right. You don't have a right to interfere with my life and do this to me. And as much as I think the sort of Lockean concept of rights is problematic, I do think there is a grain of truth there. I mean, as much as I can talk about how people are something the universe is doing, that we are that we are social constructs that are their individuality is defined by our otherness, and all these concepts about realizing that sort of the myth of the individual. At the same time, as much as we are sort of constructed from this collective entity, that the individual arises in the context of the collective. I think there is. I think there has to be some sort of truth in the idea that this construction is still has its individual identity and has meaning and dignity to it of its own. That we are not merely means to an end. And so in that sense, I think that we the rights kind of point us in the direction of a kind of sense of individualism that we ought to respect, even while recognizing that there's also collective interests we are not merely individuals, we are also part of a collective, and that with rights also come responsibilities. And we have a responsibility to each other, which goes beyond just leaving each other alone. That we have to actually take care of one another. And there are all these different qualifications about how that goes about. In what way are we responsible for each other? What is the extent of our responsibility? But in any case, I guess I don't have quite an answer to that, but I think some essentialism here is kind of a useful thing, that people are intrinsically valuable. As much as nothing is really intrinsically anything, there's a certain kind of agency, a kind of individuality to us that that ought to be respected, and certain boundaries that ought to be understood as sacred in a sense. Anyway, I'm babbling now, so I guess I'll end it there. Peace.